You very much for the invite, Clifford. Delighted to be here. My name is Nick Kroll. I'm a senior analyst manager in the Making Data Count team based at NHS England. I'm joined today by Adam.
Hi everyone, so I'm Adam Smith. I'm also Senior Analyst Manager in the Making Data Count team at NHS England.
Bill, so what we're going to cover today is really an overview of our materials. We like these to be interactive sessions. So please do comment in the chat your thoughts or questions, and we'll try and address them as we go along. And then hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end as well. And we are also easily contactable via email should you want to discuss further. So what is Making Data Count all about? And some of you may have come across us before. I believe my colleagues Karen and Sam did a session a couple of years ago. So you may have already encountered us before. But what we're effectively all about is, I'm not sure I can click, Adam.
Right, there you go.
Thanks. Has it come up?
Yeah, it has on mine. You might need to take
Okay, I need to
control if
sync.
not.
Yes, there we go. That's fine. I trust it comes up. So we're all about using data for better decision making, and we do this through three strands. We have a range of teaching materials in the forms of interactive PDFs that you can access. We've got a getting started PDF and a strengthening your conditions, your decisions. We have a range of tools. So these are tools that allow you to create meaningful charts for your analysis. So the majority of them are in Excel, so they're easy to pick up, put your data in, and the analysis is all done for you. So we're actually going to do a demo of one of these tools today and how you can apply your own data to it. And finally, we do lots and lots of training. Before the pandemic, predominantly face-to-face, but since the pandemic, it's facilitated us to reach a far wider audience, such as the session we're doing today. So what are we going to cover today? Well, we have a structured training course. We have 8 steps and 2 currently in development, and these are all an hour long. So we're not going to be able to cover absolutely everything that Making Data Count is all about, but we're going to try and give you a flavor, a bit of an overview of how you can make better use of your data. And then we'll tell you about how you can go away and learn a little bit more if you so wish. So I think I'm handing over to you, Adam. No?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Nick. Also, I'll add in that I've flagged where the steps might come in throughout the slides. So if something is relevant to one of these steps, I've flagged it in the slides. And if you're interested in learning further, you're more than welcome to join this step training. And we'll have some more details on how you do that towards the end. So first off, let's have a look at where we were currently when we started this program, what we're trying to change, what we're used to seeing. And should say that I've been an analyst in the NHS for 15-20 years, and so I've created all of these as well as seen them in lots and lots of reports, and we think there's definitely a better way of doing it. So we're going to show you some of the ideas today about what's not quite right and how we can improve it. So if I start off by looking at this one, so this is all these examples, actually I should say, are real life. We've pulled them out of board reports, committee reports, papers, etc., etc., and we're presenting them and showing you a better way of doing it. So this is a real life quality and safety dashboard from a trust in England, and this is a line in the dashboard that looks at friends and family test. So in here, what we can see is we've got a 1 month trend. So what that means in this case is that they've taken what they've called the latest value. So that is the current month that they're looking at in their reporting. So it's usually the month that's just gone by. So that'd be February 23 if we were thinking modern day. And then they've simply compared it against the previous month. So against the January 23. And we don't think that's very useful because 1 month trends aren't very good at telling you about what's going on underneath the data and actually if there is a trend or not. And I'll come back onto those 2-point comparisons on the next slide. But also we're looking at this from the narrative point of view. So this had narrative underneath, it was part of a set of papers. And in the narrative, they said there that there's been an increase. It's actually a different line. So don't worry, the numbers aren't exactly the same as in the table. But it says there's an increase from 95.36% to 95.76%. And we just don't think that's very important. It's an increase of 0.4 percentage points. And we don't think it's important, but at worst, we think it could be some distracting narrative. And we will touch upon a little bit of narrative towards the end. So it's also worth thinking about the words you write alongside the data that you present and how you present that data. So let's have a look at 2-point comparison. So we've seen there it usually occurs when we're taking 1 month, current month against the previous month. So if we think about that, and if we think about the first number, so in this example, this is the number of serious incidents. So we've said that in October 21, there were 5 serious incidents in the trust that we're looking at data for. So then we look at the next month, November 21. And what do we know about the number for November 21? We know it can only be one of 3 things. So it can only be higher, lower, or the same, and it can't be anything else. But that doesn't really tell us about the trends or the patterns underneath. If we've got a target, whether we're able to meet the target, if we're improving, if we're deteriorating, etc., etc. And all it really reminds us of is Bruce Forsyth and his play your cards right. So, as Nick said, we like to keep it nice and chatty, nice and interactive. So we're going to go into a really short task. Feel free to shout out, use the chat, talk to us, answer the questions that I'm about to ask you. Don't worry, nothing too difficult. So, first one, what do you think of this visualization of data? As I say, all real examples. This is from a real delayed transfer care report. It's a bit old now, but it is real. What do you think of this?
He's gone straight in there with awful. I agree.
Excellent. My chat's not working very well, so you might need to keep an eye on it for, isn't it?
Too busy, confusing, busy. Yeah. We sometimes get some modern art associations.
Yeah, some people like to put it on the wall.
It's a
Yeah,
mess.
oh, it's
Yeah.
caught up now. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so you're all you're all along the right lines there. I think it's not very good, is it? It's terrible if we're honest, and it really doesn't help us to see what's happening underneath the data. There is no way. So I used to work in this area, so I know the data pretty well. I did not create this graph, I will admit. I know the data pretty well, but I can't tell you what's going on here. I just can't figure it out. So this is not the way to present data. Quite obviously, we've started with a really horrible one to get you going. The best use we found for this is when we used to go and teach in real life, in person. We'd hand these out on bits of paper and someone made an origami crane, I think that's called maybe. But anyway, yeah, not very good. Let's throw that away. On to the next one. So what do you think about this one, this way of presenting data? And what would you do with this way of presenting data? Would you be able to figure out what's going on?
See lots of financial reports like this, don't we, Adam?
Yeah, this is a common one for accountants.
Yeah, zone out, overly complex, lose interest, absolutely.
Structured but still overload. Yeah, that's really good. Okay. So yeah, this is perhaps not the best way to do it either. As someone who's comfortable with numbers, I find this a lot easier. I can kind of look at what's going on, but I have a habit, and lots of people have a habit. When they get a table of numbers, they just start circling numbers and trying to make a point of it. But again, we're not looking at trends. We're not looking at we're looking at a bit over time, but we're not looking at it properly over time. We're not being able to see what's going on, and we're kind of guessing a little bit based on the numbers. So it's not as good, but some people do like to see the numbers behind it. So that's a good start, and at least it's starting to be over time. So let's move on to the next one. Very common here in England. I imagine they are over there too. So this is a classic RAG table. So what do people think about this? So almost we've turned that table of numbers into a RAG table, RAG standing for red, amber, green. What do you think of this one?
Yeah, bit better. Some people are thinking easier to read. Some people are drawn to the red. Some people are drawn to the green. We find, but actually, I think people who are colorblind find it difficult to to understand and see the difference. Yeah, distracting.
Yeah. So I think again we're along the right lines. Good group. We're getting there. Easier to read. Yeah. So it does become a bit easier, and I think the color helps us a little bit, and it makes it easier to see the numbers for some reason. I always think with this one, but some people get drawn to the red, some people get drawn to the green. And what's it actually telling us? So if we think about what a rag table is trying to do, this is trying to tell us if we've met a target or not. So if we met the target, we'll get a green box. If we've not met the target, we'll get a red box. In some cases, I really hate this. You'll get an amber box where you've just about met it or you just about failed it, when no one's never quite sure which way round it is. But thankfully, in this one, it's just red and green. But they've also added in, which I find really unhelpful. It looks like it might be a good idea, but it's not. They've added in a trend arrow. So this is again a 2-point comparison. So if month on month the value has gone up, they've given it a green upwards arrow, and then they've put a percentage value in the side. If it's gone down, they've given it a red arrow, red downwards arrow, and they've given it a negative value in the side. So really unhelpful to add that bit in there as well, we think. So reg tables aren't our favorite. We think there's definitely a better way of looking at trends over time and also looking at being able to meet a target over time. And we'll come on to that, as I'm sure you suspect we will. On to the next one. So now we've all been promoted. We are now all board members. We have just been given 400-page board report to read over the weekend before our board meeting on Monday morning. So you come to a page, and you've got this on there, this nice table. How long are you going to spend on this page and considering what's going on this page?
Maggie, yes, need run charts, but it's all green, isn't it, Adam? So I think I would just flip the page and feel assured. Hides the data. You'd assume all well, absolutely.
Yeah, not long. And I always say I think I spend longer describing what this page is than people would spend actually going through it. So if you think you've got that stack of papers, you'd probably just be flicking over because all green, everything looks okay. Let's move on. So in the spirit of what I've just said, let's move on. So you come to the next page. This is the next page. Is there anything on this page that you would be concerned about? Is the one graph that you're going to be looking at in particular? And if so, which one would that be?
Yeah, bottom left, 6 weeks, graph 3. Yeah,
Bottom left, 6 weeks, graph 3. Yeah, yeah,
all
yeah.
got it.
All got it. And I think the interesting part on this is that you may have done our courses before, you may know what we do, but if you don't, you've all kind of picked out that there's something happening in that bottom graph. It's very clear that there's something going on there and that we want to look into it in more detail. I haven't told you about the orange or the blue, all those lines that go around it, but you've all been able to pick it out. So what I don't know if any of you did spot is that this is actually the same data as we all just flipped over on the previous page. Exactly the same data, but because that was a rag table and it was giving green cell if we passed the target, and we have in all of these graphs, even this little number down, getting close to the target line, but isn't quite underneath the target line. So all these cells are going to be green. So we've been given assurance, perhaps false assurance, that everything was okay and we're happy with everything. But actually, we can see that there is significant. Let me flick over actually to the next slide. I've got it bigger. There is significant deterioration happening in this measure, in this service. And we really need to go away and look into why that's happening and to try and halt that decline because it's going to have a serious impact on our patients. And there's just an orange circle to prove it. Oh, and sorry, I pulled out the line as well. So we can just see that it is real data. It is all green, but actually there's a problem here and we need to look into it. So back onto that reg table. So if we look at this reg table, and I want to pick out a couple of lines from this RAG table. So this is about RTT performance, so referral to treatment pathways in the UK, in England, and it's about waiting within 18 weeks. So whether you've been seen within 18 weeks. So if I pull out two lines, first line being general surgery. So we can see from the RAG table that it is all red, meaning we fail in the target. So we are consistently failing the target. All the boxes are red. We've then got that red downwards arrow towards the end, and we've got that negative number. So we might also think that not only are we consistently failing, but we are now also in decline. So let's have a look at this in an SPC chart and let's pull it out over time. So once we do that, we can actually see, and should admit we've cheated a little bit. We've added a few more data points in here, but it is real data and we've pulled it out a bit further. So we can now see that actually there is improvement going on underneath that data. And we might have assumed that we were just in decline, failing, always looking for a red box because we aren't meeting that target, but we are actually getting quite close to it and we've got improvement going on. So it's really important in this case to look at that data over time to see if we're actually getting closer to a target. Let's pull out another line. So this is rheumatology. Exactly the same thing again. All red boxes, red downwards arrow, negative number at the end. So we might think, now that we've seen the other one over time, we might think actually maybe there's some hidden improvement underneath here. But unfortunately, if we pull this out and look at it over time, there isn't any improvement. And actually, we are deteriorating and we are going down quite significantly. So if we just saw this red line in our reports, in our performance reporting each month, we might think, not pay too much attention to it. It might think, oh, it's always failing, it's always in decline. So we might just accept that. But actually, there's a significant issue going on here, and we really need to look at it underneath it and look at the reasons behind that deterioration. So really quick whiz through of variation. So variation matters, and it matters because if we don't understand what normal variability looks like, we're going to have a problem understand when something is actually changing in our system or not. So there are two types of variation. The first one being normal variation, and we in SPC language, we call that common cause variation. And I've got a little travel to work analogy that I'd like to bring to life. So if we think about traveling to work, when I used to live in London, I would get the tube into the office and I'd have to make two changes on that journey. So if I was to get off one, cross over the platform, and there was a train waiting for me in the platform, I'd jump straight on it. I'd get to work a bit quicker. So if anyone asks, I'd say I get to work it takes me about 40 minutes to get to work. But on some days, on a good day, if the train's waiting for me in the platform, I'll cross over, I'll get straight on, and I'll get there in about 30, 35 minutes. If the opposite happens on a bad day, if I've got into the platform and the train's just pulling away, then it will take me about 50 minutes. But that normal, that average is about 40 minutes. So I'll always say it'd be about 40 minutes. And I know that it's not always going to be exactly 40 minutes. I know some days it's going to wander, as I say, it's going to get a bit longer, it's going to get a bit shorter, but it's around 40 minutes. And that's just that normal variation that we're all comfortable with and we all experience in our everyday lives. Second type of variation is unusual variation, and in SPC language we call this special cause variation. And now this can be split down into two types of special cause variation. So the first type is, when it clicks over, is one-off variation. So again, think of traveling to work. If we were to drive to work, if we were to have an accident on the way, it will take us significantly longer to get to work. We'll have to get out of the car, make sure everyone's okay, exchange insurance details, car might not work, might need a tow, etc., etc., etc. And if we were plotting our travel time to work, we'd know on that one day it will be a lot higher than it will be on the other days, because hopefully we're not crashing that car on every journey. So it's going to be a one-off, it's going to be a blip, it's going to be a high point on the graph. Second type of special cause variation is sustained change. So I now live in a place called Coventry. There is a big ring road around the outside, and they're obsessed with doing roadworks on it. I have to drive my daughter to school on the other side of that ring road, and it's taking me significantly longer to get to school each morning. Sorry, the doorbell just went and distracted me. Taking me significantly longer to get to school each morning. It's taking me about 5 or 6 minutes each way extra. But that is a sustained change. But it is only a sustained change while those roadworks are on. So it will only carry on while those roadworks are on. And unfortunately, although they said it would only take 6 months, it's now been 9, nearly 12 months. So, but as soon as they come off, I'd expect it, if I was plotting it, I'd expect that line to come back down to where it was previously, if not a bit better, because they supposedly improved the road junctions. So important thing to remember, I think, with that sustained change, that it will stay on. Yeah, doorbell is special cause, and it's really distracting me. Sorry about that. So that sustained change will only stay on, will only be evident in the data while we've got something impacting on the data, if that makes sense. So as in roadworks, I expect when those roadworks come off, the graph will drop back down. But if we were looking at improvement projects, we might want to be thinking about embedding that. So we've embedded the improvement into the system, so it will stay there and we'll be able to get a bit of sustainability.
Adam, do you want to take the bet on? I can do the
No,
next
it's
few
all right.
slides.
We're okay now. Thanks. Thanks, Nick. So I've talked quite a bit about SPC charts, but what are they? So here we go. Anatomy of an SPC chart. So really simply, an SPC chart is a line chart plotted over time. So in this instance, we've got months along the bottom, but you can have hours, days, weeks, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, months, quarters, etc., etc. And you can even have consecutive patients as long as the data is in time order. So it needs to be consecutive. So time along the bottom, measure value up the side, and really simply for each month in this case, we're plotting that point onto the graph and we're joining it up into a line chart. What then turns this into an SPC chart is we've got these 3 reference lines, we call them. So through the middle of the data, we've got a solid black line on this example, which is an arithmetic mean. So we've added all the numbers up and we've divided by the number of numbers to give a mean. We've then got these 2 dotted lines, and these are called the process limits or control limits. I use the terms interchangeably, so you might hear me use either or today. So we've got these process limits, and the bottom one is called a lower process limit. The upper one is called an upper process limit, and these are calculated using a type of standard deviation called sigma. Now, you don't need to know all about that because we've got tools. All our tools will do this for you, but it's just really key to point out that this isn't standard deviation exactly. It is a type of standard deviation which takes into account the order over time. So if you were to build one of these and use standard deviation, it would give you the wrong control limits. Between these control limits, statistically, over 99% of our data will fall. So we know that our next point, in all probability, over 99% probability, will fall between these 2 dotted lines. And then final bit, for a robust analysis, we suggest that you have at least 15 points of data, and this will make it a bit more statistically robust. Now, the good things about SPC charts is that it can help us to identify special cause variation. So back to that unusual variation that we just talked about. So there are 4 rules that we use to detect special cause variation. There are other rules available, and different people teach different rules, but we've come to these 4 rules as we think these 4 rules are the most important and useful for healthcare. So the first rule is a single point outside the process limits. Oh, it's moving on without me clicking. Excuse me. So a single point outside the process limits. And if we think back to this idea of 99+% of our data points, there is a less than 1% chance it will be outside the lines. Therefore, it's going to likely to be statistically significant. The next one that I like to go through is called the shift. And this is where we've got 6 or more points in a row above or below the mean line. So all above the mean line or all below the mean line in a row. And that's called a shift. Next one is a run or a trend, and this is where we've got 6 or more points in consecutive ascending or descending order. Importantly, this time they can cross the mean. And then we've got this final one, and I'll leave this one until the end always. And this is 2 out of 3 points close to the process limits. So close to the process limits might not sound very mathematical, statistical, but there is some statistics behind it. We just don't talk about them because it gets quite confusing. And all our tools will highlight these rules for you. So 2 out of 3, close to that process limit. And what this does, and what I've used it for in the past, is this is a great early warning signal. So if you see these 2 out of 3 rule broken, it just gives you that thought to go and look into the data behind it, because what that could do, if it's an improvement, we could push it on, so we've got a sustained change, so we've got this shift. If it's a deterioration, we could go in and we could try and halt that deterioration before it becomes something more significant. And as you may have guessed from what I've been saying, once you've got a special cause rule break, we suggest that you get your best Sherlock Holmes outfit and your magnifying glass and you go and look into the reasons why there is special cause, the reasons why statistically there is something happening in that data, and give it an assignable cause and a reason. To help us do this, you might have spotted that we use a lot of orange and blue. And the reasons behind this, as Nick kind of mentioned earlier, is that we found that, well, we knew that people who were colorblind really struggled to see and differentiate between red and green. And we were told that orange and blue was much easier to see differences between. So therefore, it made it a lot more accessible for a lot more people. So what we then came up with, we've got this orange and blue colouring convention. So you might have seen, and let me go back actually one slide. You might have seen on our graphs that you've got these orange dots. So orange dots are denoting special cause variation, and it's deteriorating performance. So concerning performance, where something's going downwards and there is statistically something is going downwards. The opposite side of that, we've also got the blue dots, which signify improving picture. And then we've got those grey dots, which are common cause variation. So that's just that normal everyday variation. So on all our graphs, you will get at least one summary icon. And these summary icons take that special cause rule breaks and they turn them into a single icon that you can see in the top corner of our graphs. So if you've got if you haven't got a target on your data, you will always get this one variation icon, and it will pop up in the top right hand corner there, and it will be either orange or blue or grey. And we've also got a purple, but I don't think we go into that too much today. That is for when there is special cause variation, but we haven't assigned a direction of improvement or direction of travel. If you've got a target on your data, we can accept targets on our charts. And targets will come up as a red dotted line, and you'll get a second icon. And this looks at whether we're consistently able to meet a target or not. And that will pop up alongside that variation icon. So if you've got a target, you'll get 2 icons. If you haven't, you'll get at least just 1 icon, which is a variation icon. So let's have a look at that, understanding variation. So as I say, we've got this orange colour, which denotes deterioration or concerning performance. And then we've got an orange H or an orange L to say whether it's going up, higher for H, or it's going down, L for lower. And if it's concerning, if it's deteriorating, you'll get that orange, as I say. If it's improving, you'll get the blue, L or H. And if it's just in common cause, you'll get a grey common cause icon, normal variation icon. Then for our targets, understanding capability assurance, we term this. So you'll get an orange F if you're consistently failing the target, and statistically it looks like you're going to be unable to meet that target without some serious service redesign underneath. You'll then get a blue P if you're capable of passing that target, P for passing the target, and this shows that you're consistently able to meet that target. And then you'll get this grey question mark if it's unreliable process. So what this shows is that some months, if we think back to that rag table, some months it's red, some months it's green, some months it's red, some months it's green, and it just goes either side of the line. And then again, if we think back to our 99+% of probability to fall between these two lines, we can see, because the target line is really through the middle of the data, that any given month at random, we have the potential to fall above or below and to meet that target or not. I should say we go through this in a lot more detail in our step 1 and in our step 2. So if you want a bit more information on particularly the target setting and how we deal with targets, I'd suggest looking at those as the first protocol. So now onto some new words, I think perhaps. So we've got 2 words for you. One I suspect will be new, one you've heard before. But these words are both frequently seen within the NHS. So the first word is spuddling. So this is an old English word, and this means to make a lot of fuss about trivial things as if they were important. And I know from experience, I see that so much in the NHS. We overreact to some numbers, make a big deal out of it, alarm bells go off, but actually it's just that normal variation, and we're overreacting to what we think we're seeing in the graph or in the data table. Second word is tampering. So tampering is all about overreacting to single data points, and this happens a lot when you're only looking at 2-point comparisons. So if we think back to that serious incidents example in the opening slides, if we had 5 in October and then we had 7 in November, if we were tampering and we were just looking at those 2 points, we might overreact and we might say, this is terrible, we've got much worse, we've added X amount of percent onto our serious incidents, something needs to happen, etc., etc. But if we were to pull that out and look at it over time, we might find that 7 is actually still quite low, because ordinarily over time we were getting 12, 15, and we've come down and we're actually improving even though it's too high than the previous month. So tampering is when we overreact to one data point based on another data point generally. And we've actually turned spuddling into a behavioral change. So we've got these cards printed up by the Health Foundation, and we give these out to board members particularly when we go and teach boards. So you've got a yellow card, and if someone spots spuddling for the first time in a meeting, they wave the yellow card, and then we've got a red card. So if they spot it again, they wave the red card. So it's a bit silly, but it's actually really driving a behavioural change in boards that accept these and take these on. Because what it's saying is we don't really need to go over that, because actually it's just spuddling. We're making a lot of fuss about something, and actually there's more important things to look at and to go on to. So onto a bit of evidence. So why do we do this? Why do we talk about SPC so much? So in England, we've got the CQC, and I believe from a bit of research this morning that this is the equivalent to the RQIA in Northern Ireland. So the CQC have said that a sign of a mature QI approach is that boards should be looking at data as time series analysis, as we've been seeing in the SPC charts, and make decisions on that understanding of variation. And then underneath it says the data should be presented as run or control charts instead of bar, pie, reg, etc. And then there's a little line on narrative analysis at the end, but Nick will go over a bit more narrative uh, in the coming slides. So CQC always look out for this, and they particularly look out for it in board papers, but they do also look out for it in committees and working its way all the way down towards an improvement work. So they are looking for this when they go in. I don't know if it would be the same with the RQIA. So where do SPC charts come from? So there is a strong evidence base. They are a really old tool. So they were first around in the 1920s, developed to be used in manufacturing industries to look at defects coming off a track line. But more and more, they've been adopted by other industries, and healthcare has taken them and embraced them and rolled them out really widely. So these are a couple of papers that look at why we shouldn't be using RAG reports, and how we should be equipping leadership teams to drive better decisions and to better improvement work. These are both available, I think, in the BMJ Quality and Safety. We've got some links for those. And then finally, shameless plug, this is our boss, Sam Riley, who heads up our team. And she's written in BMJ Leader about our programme and the impact it's making on trust in England. Okay, so key uses of SBC, and probably where I suspect that most of you have seen SBCs used before, if you've encountered them, is within improvement work. And it helps us to answer that second question in the IHI model for improvement. How will we know that change is an improvement? But as you may have seen today, we think that as well as being really important tool for improvement, they can also be used for assurance and target setting. And that makes them more broadly available, we think, in hospitals and in trusts. But let's go back and look at some of the improvement work. So in improvement, I know I've worked for a long time in improvement before this job, and we'd always be setting baselines in our data. So baseline being where we look at our previous performance before we go in and make any changes, and we look at whether the change has been improved. So really answering that second question, look at the data, how it was before and how it was after our intervention. So baselines, we do have the ability to do baselines in our tools, but we think that baselines should only be used for improvement work. And I'll come on to this graph in a second in the next slides to give you a bit more detail. But we don't think that baselines should be used in performance monitoring, because performance monitoring, we're looking at differences over time. So we've not specifically gone in and changed anything, particularly when we're working with boards. We say, look at your performance over time and what's the statistical, is there any special cause or any statistical significance underneath the data? Also, it says on there recalculations. So there is also a technique called recalculation. Nick will go through this a little bit in the demo, but our tools won't handle both a baseline and a recalculation. So a recalculation comes in, and it's a bit like has happened here. It comes in when there is statistical embedded sustained change, and we've then recalculated the mean and the process limits around what the data and what the system now looks like. And you can see that they've actually put in two recalculations here. So recalculations and baselines, we talk about mostly in step 4. So if you're interested in learning more, step 4 is where we dig deeper into the theories and the techniques behind SPC. So please have a look at that one. But then let's look further into this chart that I've just shown you. So this is my favorite SPC chart, I think. So this comes from a lot of work that's happened in Sheffield. They've had regular weekly improvement meetings, and it goes back a long way. This goes back to 2012. So they started off by plotting, and this was about active recovery and getting people discharged and reducing length of stay. So they've looked here and they've plotted onto this graph what it was like at the beginning, and this is their baseline essentially. So this is what did the world look like before we made any improvements, before we made any interventions. So you can see here the blue line through the middle. This is length of stay, I should say, up the side. This is weekly data, so it's plotted each week onto the graph. And we can see here that before the intervention, they had a length of stay of around 5.5 days. But really importantly, if we look at these on this chart, it's these green lines, these are the process limits. We can now see that our range of variation is really wide. So it could go up to 8 days or down to 3 days. So if you were a patient on that ward, or if you had a relative on that ward, you could expect them to stay on average 5.5 days, but a maximum of up to 8 days or as few as 3 days. And that's quite a range of variation if you're trying to hoping you're getting out of hospital or trying to look after someone and work out arrangements for somebody coming out of hospital. Really difficult if you don't know if it's going to be 3 days or 8 days. So they did loads and loads of improvement work, started up these weekly meetings, and then as a result of that improvement work, they've then plotted what that length of stay looks like over time, again, from that period of improvement work starting, continuing through the weekly meetings. And they've also done a few different things in the background as a result of those weekly improvement meetings. So we can now see that our blue line, our average length of stay has come down to about 3.5 days. But also importantly, our range of variation is narrowed quite a bit. So we've gone from 3.5 days average, and now it's a maximum of 5 days and as few as 2 days. So continued this great improvement work, continued on weekly meetings, etc., 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 and they've plotted their data. And now we can see towards the end of this graph, and I know that this work has continued, so I really should get an updated graph. But we can now see that on average, the length of stay, and if you're a patient on this ward, I think this is really powerful. If you're a patient on this ward, you can expect to stay about a day. But we now see that our upper process limit is a day and a half, and our lower process limit is half a day. So again, if you're a patient or had a relative, you can expect them to be home at worst by lunchtime tomorrow, or they could be coming home later today. But on average, you're going to stay about a day. And I think that's a great use of SPC for improvement work. And it also shows really clearly that did our changes work? Yes, they did, because we've got it here. We've got the cold, hard data, and it shows that improvement in action.
And these are recalculations, aren't they, Adam?
Yeah, so these are recalculations. So they've taken off, this essentially is the same as a baseline period because they've taken this pre-data and plotted it with control limits, but then they've recalculated at the start of the intervention, and they've recalculated again when there is clear statistical significance. So here there'll have been special cause rule break because we can see that this data is so much below that average line. And then we've got one from the other side. So did the changes work in this case? Well, we don't think they did because they've put lots of interventions, lots of changes in here. I think this is monthly data this time. And we can see that actually it hasn't really shifted the dial very much. So the mean line has gone up very slightly, but hardly noticeable. And actually our range of variation has increased a small amount as well. So we've not really made the improvements that we hope to go in and make here. And so no, our changes didn't work. And what might we consider in that case? We might think about, were they the correct interventions? Did we implement them properly? Are there other factors we should consider? So is the factors outside of this falls data that we should consider about the reasons why people might be falling? So in this case, we're back to our, so should say we cover a lot of this in step 6. So step 6 is all about improvement methods, measurement for improvement, good old classic improvement science. Animation slightly out of order. What we should do here is, if it hasn't worked, we should go back to our PDSA cycle and we should look and we should study the results and we should act appropriately and see if we can change it, change something, make some new interventions to see if they can change that rate of falling. So then triangulation. So we cover triangulation in step 7, which is all about triangulating data. But really simply, triangulation in this case is about looking at different measures together to see if anything is having an impact on the other. So these might also actually be ones that you don't necessarily think about looking together. So this is from some improvement work I was doing about 5 years ago. And I've recreated the graphs here, but they show the same kind of pattern. So what we looked at is we had weekly meetings. We had these weekly improvement meetings where we go in and we were trying to improve the pediatric asthma and wheeze pathway. So for that, we thought about what data we might want to be seeing and what we were actually trying to improve underneath there. So we've had a big focus on the emergency department, so the pediatric emergency department. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure that we increase the percentage of children who were getting a written asthma management plan when they left the ED. So we looked into some of the baseline data and we reckoned that we're about 30% of kids were getting a written asthma management plan as they were leaving. So we really wanted to improve that. But to do that, we didn't just want to look at the percentage with a written asthma management plan, which is this one down here. We also wanted to look at some other measures together to see if there's anything that might be driving the ability for the staff to give the patient a written plan on their departure. So to do this, we looked at 3 other measures together. So we looked at the total weekly volume of attendances in the peds emergency department. So we thought, and we had a few ideas, that if there were more kids in the department, if the department is busier, then it'd be harder for staff to find that time to do written management plans. Then we wanted to obviously see how many of the kids were in for attending for asthma and wheeze. So we plotted that on here because we thought, again, if there were more kids in for asthma and wheeze in any particular week, then we'd expect it to be harder for the staff to find that time. Although that actually didn't prove to be true. And then finally, we wanted to look at general peds performance. So again, we thought if performance was hit, then it might be hard for them to find that time. So just an example of how we can use data together and look at different measures in one chart. We actually printed these out and put them on the wall for each meeting. So we looked at these together. We didn't just look at one measure on its own in silo. We wanted to get the whole picture. And there's obviously, we could have put more and more on there, but these were the 4 that we came down to because we thought they were important. So triangulation of data is really useful and important in your improvement work. So if you're interested in that, please have a look at step 7. And then the final one is benchmarking. So benchmarking is all about comparing yourself against others with the idea of comparing yourself against the best. In this example here, we've got internal benchmarking. So this is RTT performance for different specialties within the same hospital trust to see if there's a difference in those specialties and their performance. So to do benchmarking, we've got this in our tools, which is a summary icon table. I think Nick will go through that when he does the tool demo. So that gives you a really quick way of looking at a number of different metrics, or in this case, a number of different specialties for the same metric in one really quick, concise table view. And then for comparisons and benchmarking, we look at data in these that are called distribution charts. So this is just simply plotting the measure value for one given month, which is March 2019 in this case, and plotting each specialty on there in consecutive order to look at where's performing the best and where needs some help and where needs some improvement.
But a snapshot can be a bit misleading sometimes, can't it, Adam?
It absolutely can. And this is all covered in step 5, which is comparisons and benchmarking. And in there, we do say it's also handy to look at this data over time as well as in a snapshot. But a snapshot can be useful if you're looking for areas that are performing really well to take ideas and best practice from to then bring back to the areas which aren't performing so well. Right, and that's enough from me. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Adam. So if you just go to the next slide before I take the screen. So we didn't want to just do all theory today. So we're going to go through some practical techniques on how to produce these types of charts. So we have a range of charts in Excel that are publicly available, and we'll send you all the links and information on how to get your hands on them. We're only going to go through this top one today, this single chart. But for context, we have the ability to do multiple SBC charts in one Excel. We have another type of SBC chart called rare events, which allows us to look at things like serious incidents or stillbirths, for example. Pareto chart, which I'm sure you're familiar with from the QI world, looking at the key drivers. And for more wide scale analysis, we have SQL, Power BI, Tableau, and Click extensions to allow many charts to be pulled together from a data warehouse. And perhaps not applicable here, but we also have some mortality best practice dashboard. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to enter some data into our tool. See where we get up to. Okay, let me just figure out which screen I want to share. So I want to do this one. Nope, not that one, sorry. So I need to move that over there. Okay, so as I've already said, this is our single chart tool. So I use this quite a lot when I've got a presentation. I just want to produce one SBC chart for a key metric, and this is a really great and easy way to do it. So all of our tools have versions and a bit of instructions on how to use it, but we're going to head straight to the front sheet, and we can also use the macros to navigate. So this button here, for example. So The tool is divided up into various sections. So we've got the top here where we can set our titles and a few parameters. We've got where we're going to enter the data here on the left. We've got our chart here. We've got some further parameter and configuration settings on the right, and then some summary statistics at the bottom. So let's get straight into it. So I want to name my title proportion of patients waiting within 18 weeks. And this is a NHS England standard for outpatient appointments. My team is my trust A, and my measure is percentage. And you'll see this all appears on the chart, so we don't need to do it ourselves. Now, this is key. So what does improvement look like? So here we need to judge, are we aiming for an increase in this metric or a decrease in this metric? And for this, we want more people, more patients waiting within 18 weeks. So I'm going to set high as good. I know I've got my data on my other screen, so I know my data starts in 2019, and I know it's monthly data, but we're mindful that months may not be the best frequency. So we also have the ability to look at daily data, weekly data, fortnightly data, monthly or quarterly data. But for this example, we're going to use monthly data. And I know I've got 40, oh, how many metrics do I have? How many months? Let me just check. 48 months. And then you'll see all the dates appear on the left. So I'm going to go ahead and enter my data. So you can either enter this, you can either type it in 0.94, because I'm using percentages, we need to do it as decimals, and you'll see the data starts to appear. But 99 times out of 10, we'll probably want to copy and paste our data unless we've got data on paper. So here we go. I'm going to put that in there, and I'm going to put that in here. And immediately we can see that we've got our statistical process control chart that's been generated from our data. We've got the control limits, we've got the mean, and we've got quite a lot of special cause variation. We've got loads of blue here and then orange here. So we've got quite an unstable process. So this top chart is our key XSBC chart. It's called an X chart. And this is what we're going to predominantly focus on. We do have another chart at the bottom here, which may be useful in some circumstances. But what this basically tells you is the true difference, the absolute difference, we call it, between two consecutive data points. So we can see if there's been a big shift between two data points. So we can see there's one data point here, so but two data points that we've got a large shift, but we can also see this on the X chart, the SBC chart above here. So I think let's think about how we can improve with this chart. So on the right here, we firstly have the ability to change our y-axis, our vertical axis. So I'm got quite a lot of white space here. So I'm going to set my minimum value here as 40%. And I'm going to change my axis using this macro, and you can immediately see the chart changes. We may also want to change the date format. I'm looking at monthly data, so I don't really care about the day of the month because it's all at the start of the month. And I'm going to change it to month, year, and then the dates look slightly better. So let's think about how we can make some further changes to this chart. Let's start with adding some interventions. So this is data over the pandemic, but we could also add your QI interventions, annotating the chart. But for this, because we use this example to demonstrate how we can deal with data over the COVID period, I'm going to enter COVID here, and you can see that appears on the chart. But I'm going to take this one step further, and I'm actually going to add a recalculation during in March 2020 when COVID initially hit. And this is because we can see there's a huge shift in our data. We've had a massive reduction in performance. So we know there's a new process appearing here, and we've got this sustained performance reduction. So I'm going to take that annotation out, and in my recalculations, I'm going to put COVID here. And what you can see here immediately, we've got that chart splits up into two chunks. So we can see the pre-COVID performance or pre-intervention, if we're thinking if this was a QI measure. And then we've got this new process where we've got wider control limits, and we can see the post-COVID performance. Now, in England, we had a time where many processes started to stabilize after those initial lockdowns, where everything was a bit crazy, where you've got this big variation in data because appointments were cancelled, people weren't able to attend their appointments. So we put another recalculation called reset, and this is going to be on the 1st of April 2021. And this really requires you to look at your data and think about where there's been a further change, because we've got this really variable process, and you can see we've got now this sustained reduction in performance shown by these orange dots. So I'm going to put reset here. And then it breaks our chart up again. So again, in a QI process, these could be your interventions, and you can see how your latest process compares to your pre-intervention or your second intervention, for example. So we can see we've got common cause variation shown by this, the grey dot, and our icon here shadows that. So if we think about those icons, we're always going to get that one variation icon on our chart, and we've got common cause variation. Now, we may also want to have a target. So we have a target of 92% of patients waiting within 18 weeks. And you can see that target on the chart now. And this is now looking at our current process, our latest process, and comparing the control limits to that target. And you can see that this target is higher than the upper control limit. And because we want to be above this target, we get this orange F, failing or falling short of the target. So if we perhaps let's just hypothetically change this target to let's say 55%. We've decided the target's not 92%, it's 55%. And now you can see the target lies within the control limits, close to the mean, and therefore we've got this grey assurance icon representing that we're inconsistently going to hit and miss our target. Hypothetically, again, we're going to change our target to 45%. That puts the target down below the lower control limit. So based on the current process, we're consistently going to achieve this target. As you can see, all the data points are above. So let's take out our target, and we are going to take out our recalculations, because I want to show how the baseline function works. So let's imagine this is a QI project and we want to actually ignore the metric for now, but we want to reduce the, let's say this number of patients waiting. So it makes a bit of sense, number of patients waiting. So we want to reduce the number of patients waiting, but we want to set a baseline because we've got the stable process before any interventions. And this is 14 months worth of data, and this could be weekly data. So I'm going to put a baseline in using this function here. And what that does, that calculates the control limits based on those first 14 data points that we've identified as our baseline. And immediately that allows us to see how the post-intervention, which we can put in here, so intervention 1, the post-intervention process, that may be a bit too late, but I think you get the gist up there. We've got this significant improvement in the number of patients waiting. So once we've identified that, we've sustained the number of patients waiting as a reduction, we may want to take that baseline out and add in those recalculations, because what that allows us to do is to really understand that variability of our current process, whereas setting a baseline doesn't, because these control limits don't reflect the current process at all. So they're not really telling us anything about the current process, only what the pre-intervention process mean and control limits are. So I think that's everything that's important. We have got summary statistics down here, so you can see your mean and your control limits. And as Adam has said, those 4 rules are highlighted in the SPC chart, but it's not going to tell you which of the rules have been broken because they all represent the same level of statistical significance. But what you can do is you can look at the bottom data observations and it will tell you if you want a bit more information. Okay. Adam, is there anything I've missed on this tool that you think is worth highlighting?
No, I think you've covered it all.
Great.
We go through all this in step 2 as well. I don't know if you said that. So
Okay.
we've got
Yeah.
a whole hour on demoing our tools if you want some further info.
Yeah. So, okay.
Nick, there's a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Let me see what it's getting at. Yeah, what if you run out? So you on this tool, is there only a fixed amount of data points that you can put onto it?
Yeah. So there's 112. There's the capacity to put 112 data points on. And we have limited it on purpose because we don't want to put unnecessary data onto our SBC chart. So if we are getting to that 112 number of data points, we really want to start asking ourselves, so are those more historical data points important? Are we still interested in 112 weeks ago, for example, if we're holding weekly QI meetings? So that has been done on purpose, and we don't really tend to see people having to go over 112 data points. And if you are, then consider, do we need all that historical data? Do we want to reshift our baseline? Do we want to add some recalculations in to split the process up?
Also worth mentioning that it's not where we said a minimum of 15. So the upper end is not as exact as minimum of 15. So we tend to say between 80 and 100. But what will happen is if you put too many points on there without any recalculations, so recalculations make it tricky because you're almost starting again at a recalculation at point 1. But once you get over 100 points, then you will start to see that special cause signals more often. So you're going to be getting false signals in the data.
Great. Adam, are you okay to reshare?
Yep.
So that was the signal tool. So I won't go through the multi-tool tool now, but that's really helpful if you have more than one measure. The tool that we recommend using has got the capability to have 25 measures. And it's a really similar setup. You've got 3 sheets instead of one, so you put your metrics in one, your data in the other, and then you get your charts all on one page. It really only requires basic Excel skills. So you can download them from our future site, which we'll talk about how you can get access to at the end. And if you are interested in the other tools, join our step 2, or you can reach out to us as well. Great.
Do you want to take control
Yeah,
of it?
I would.
You've got a few.
I'll do it. Yeah, I'm just going to sync it. Well, so every time I move, it says I have to sync to the presenter, which is quite odd. I don't know how I can.
I think you need a new laptop.
I think so.
I'm
going to give it to you, Adam. I'm going to trust that you are going to click when you think
There
I'm
is a lot of
done,
pressure.
because it's not working. Okay. Without having to say next slide every time. Okay, so we've learned about SBC. We've talked about how to create your own charts. And that's great. But the amount of times we see excellent SBC charts, and then when we look at the narrative, which is equally as important, we see people reverting back to that 2-point comparison, that trend of the latest data point compared to the data point before it, where we know it can only go up, down, or the same. So if you look at this right-hand box, cash and cash equivalents has decreased by 14M between August and September. That's not helpful. That 14M could be 1% of the total budget. So we have to think about how we are going to write narrative effectively. And it goes back to Bruce, who used to play a game apparently, and Spudling, on whether the cards are high or low or the same. Okay. And step 3, playing out training again, all about narrative. So let's look at a really bad example of narrative writing. So this is a metric. We've got new cancer GP 62 day, and it's in bad format. We've got some red boxes, some green boxes. And when we look at the narrative, we can see what it's saying. So it says pressures continued in the first 2 months of this year, and that's representing January, February 2020. Those two red boxes where Adam's highlighting now. And then it goes on to say we've recovered the position in March, showing back that green cell. So that if I was a board member and didn't know about variation, I may be assured by that. We've recovered in the position in March. Great job. We then looked at a report from 2019, and they had similar narrative. Pressures have continued in April, a good recovery in June. And this is purely based on whether that rag table is red or green. But it was difficult in July. There we go. Thanks, Adam. So what? August showing improvement. Last one. That's the almost had it nailed. Anyway. So we pulled this into an SPC chart, but we used slightly different color conventions. And what we did, we highlighted the dots if it was red in the rag table or green in the rag table, and we pulled that through to the dots. And then we overlaid where they were saying they had pressures recovered. So we can see that they're experiencing pressures on those red dots. They've got that recovery, and now it's more difficult. Oh, we've got some improvement. And then year on, we're going back to that pressures recovered. We've got that kind of two-point comparison. But actually, after everything we know about SBC, let's take that horrible red and green coloring out. We can see that this process is in common cause variation. It's a stable process. Nothing is changing significantly. So maybe we're not tampering, but we're spuddling. We're reacting to each data point. We can see the variability in our process. We can see the target. It's close to the mean. And actually, we want to think about, okay, so it's in common cause variation, but are we happy with that level of variation? So the process limits are wide. Are we content that cancer 62 weights could vary from 60% to 100%? I know it's slightly above 100%. Is there anything we can do to reduce that variability? And we also want to say the target will hit and miss randomly. We don't want to be reacting every time we hit the target and every time we miss it. Thanks, Adam. So I talked about what bad narrative looks like, but very briefly, how can we write good narrative? What does it need? So fundamentally, we have to tell the story of the data. That is absolutely critical. We have to consider the variation. We have to think about those process limits. Is it changing significantly, which is the third square or the third part of the puzzle? We have to identify whether something is significantly changing, not whether it's hit the target for that month. And when it's significantly changing, say it's deteriorating, we want to highlight where there is action required. Is there something we need to do to prevent that further deterioration? Or on the contrary, sustain that improvement? And the final two, so we've identified an action, who is going to lead that action, and what are the timescales for action to be delivered and evaluated. And we're going to put all this together, and there we have a really value and action focused narrative. But we appreciate that these 6 parts of the puzzle may come from different places. An analyst, your BI team, are going to be able to help you tell the story of the data. They're going to be able to explain the variability, the numbers, what the mean is it changing significantly? But then we need that clinical and operational input to help identify the actions that are going to prevent that further deterioration or reduce the variability, for example. And then we put them all together. We've got this really focused analytical input, this clinical and operational input, and that is how we write meaningful narrative. And we go through loads of examples in step 3, but for time considerations, we're not going to do that today. Okay, so thank you, Clifford, for sending over some data that we're going to demonstrate everything we've done today, apart from the narrative, and how we can change some analysis that looks like this into something that's really meaningful. So this is proportion of patients waiting within 6 months for an outpatient appointment. So we've got Belfast at the top, and we've got the top 5 specialties. So thinking about that earlier part of the session, what might we conclude from this table? Well, for me, I'm going to probably assume that depending on who looks at it, are going to conclude different things. Some people are going to focus on the 4-month trend. Belfast has gone from 35 to 38, or the arrows are the wrong way around. You'll notice that was me making a mistake. Can be done when we're using trend arrows that are manually inputted. We may be focusing on the trend arrows. Which way is it going? It's not helpful. It's that 2-point comparison. So let's see if we can make some improvements. Well, some people will say, let's put it all on one chart so we can compare the data. We call this spaghetti. I'm not going to make the nice for tea joke, but we've got the 5 specialties and Belfast all on one chart. But is this helpful? Well, if you click,
Sorry.
it's okay. They're hard to understand. Is anything changing significantly? The colours are very confusing. Have we got any special cause improvement, or are they all in common cause? And it's very difficult for me to interpret that chart. So let's
just check as well. So yes, another thing about charts is, you know, it's good that people can look at it and challenge,
yeah,
or ask questions. So I'm just checking. Belfast isn't a specialty.
no. So it's not clear. So Belfast is the overall performance for the but yeah, absolutely. I should have been clear that is the all specialties together. And then you've got top 5 specialties underneath. Tight Slifford. So let's get rid of that. Let's deconstruct the spaghetti. Slight animation. So something that we may want to do is take 6 line charts. Again, this is slightly better. We can start to understand the trend over time, how the different specialties are doing. But I think we can do it we can take it one step further. We can do even better. And you've probably all guessed what I'm about to say is let's turn them into statistical process control charts. So for the entire Belfast on the top left, and then the 5 specialties, we've put them into SBC charts. We've got the same axes as well, or I've tried to keep the same axis, which has failed, but it gives you an idea of how each one is comparing, going back to that benchmarking idea. But here we can start to see where there's unusual variation. So if you click Adam, you can see dermatology, we've got that deteriorating, that last astronomical point. We've also got that for general surgery. So we're going in the wrong direction for these 2 specialties. On the contrary, we've got ophthalmology on the bottom left and TNO, where we've got an improving trend. So this is shown by the blue, and we've got the icons. And then we've got that common cause variation for Belfast and pediatric. So that's really allowed us to quickly understand how things are changing over time. We can see the mean, we can see how the control limits vary. And the final thing that we can do is use our excellent summary tables, which are available in our multi-tools. And we love these at the start of a report or a QI paper, which gives us an overview of our metrics. So we've got those 6 key metrics. So we've got Belfast in its entirety, and then the 5 specialties. We get an idea of the latest measure. We also get the variation icon, so we can quickly see that dermatology and general surgery are deteriorating. We can see ophthalmology and TNO are improving, and then we get a bit of the statistics behind it, what the mean is and what the variability is. And that is really helpful, a really helpful visualization. And imagine if we had a target. I wasn't able to understand what the target may have been for this. Just go back, Adam.
Oh, sorry.
But we would, if we had a target, an assurance icon will appear in our summary table. Great, thanks, Adam. So we often see these icons, and we've come up with some ideas about if we see these icons, what do we want to do? So this first example is a random example, it's urology. We've got this common cause variation, and we're inconsistently going to hit this target. but it's very close to that upper control limit. But so what we might want to do is we're going to put an improvement project in place for urology to improve their performance. We're going to go away and perhaps look at the model for improvement. What can we do for urology to take it out of common cause variation and make a significant improvement? The second example is we've got respiratory. So we're achieving the target, but we've got this deterioration. So we don't want to do nothing. We don't want to do nothing about it. We want to go away, investigate what are the root causes behind this deterioration, perhaps doing some of that triangulation, understanding why there's been a deterioration to hopefully prevent the continuing decline and prevent it from eventually dropping below that target line. And finally, the last example is gynecology. We've got an improving picture. Yes, we're inconsistently going to hit the target, but what we want to do here is actually celebrate, because we don't do that enough in healthcare. We think we want to say well done to gynecology for that improvement, but then put in the support networks to be able to, put in the support to be able to, continue that improvement so they can eventually hit the target consistently. With doorbells and phone ringings today, it's not like great. Anyway, Adam.
Right. So also as part of what you sent me, I had a look at there was a document with some graphs in, and these really kind of struck me as something that we could look at slightly differently. So first off, to say it's amazing that these are presented as data over time in a run chart. It's great to see. What I thought from seeing this is these were it's page 7 and 8. So it looked to me, and I might be wrong, but it looked to me like this was the same data, and this was the same data plot before an intervention and then after an intervention. And what I thought from looking at that is I could see that there was some improvement, but it was difficult to see. It is difficult to see as a run chart because you've not got those process limits in there, but it was difficult to see when it was split over 2 pages. So I had a little play with it, and this is how I would present it. It might not work for the data you've got. This is just an example based off what you sent through. So I pulled out the data from the raw file and started to think, in these, you'll see that it's plotted weekly. So it was getting on to be a few too many data points. What I do is I aggregate that up, so into a larger time period. So in this case, I tried it by aggregating it to 2 and 4 weeks. So in this example, I've got it as 2 weekly averages. So I've taken the values for each of the 2 weeks, added them together, divided by 2, and plotted this onto the chart. So what we can really see here, once we've got it onto one chart, I think, is I've put that recalculation in where there was the intervention went in and where there was the next page on the document. So we can really see now that there's been significant improvement. So it's much, much lower. So it's gone from an average of around probably 95 down to about 30. So really great improvement work going on. But I thought that I might miss that if I was looking at it over 2 pages as run charts. So just an example of a different way you can present data, great improvement work data in one chart in an SPC chart, and you can start to see that there's some variation in there and some improvement in there.
And Adam, if we had 8 metrics, for example, we could pull out that icon and put it in a summary table, put it in the front page, gives the kind of an executive summary, and then have the charts underneath, couldn't we?
Exactly. Yeah, perfect. And then you might notice that there's a lot of variation, a lot of special cause variation going on in there. That is something called autocorrelation, and it's based on the fact that your waiting list may have the same people in it week to week. We don't go into that here because it gets very complicated. You can still plot it onto an SPC chart, but we've got a few tips on how to work your way around that in our training, or give us a shout. So hopefully that's useful to see some of your own data, how we'd look at it. It, as I say, might not be quite right, but I think this shows a really powerful picture once it's in one SPC chart. And we're on to the wrap up. So We've got 7 minutes. Great. So we've got time for some questions at the end as well, but I'll just run through these. So this is the link to our interactive PDFs. They're on the NHS England website. You should be able to access and download them, and hopefully that link is clickable. If not, we can put it into the chat. And then all about staying connected. So we have a future NHS workspace where we share all of our tools, all of our teaching, or we've got an events calendar so you can sign up to teaching through there. We put recording slides, etc., etc. And there's also a really active discussion forum. So there's lots and lots of experts from across the world in SPC who contribute to that discussion forum and answer questions, which saves us having to do it. So lots of great content on there. So that link at the top, you may not be able to register, or you might need to apply if you haven't got an NHS email address. So what we think is, if people are interested, maybe if you could collate a list of people that are interested, and then we can send you invites out and you'll then be able to join it, because otherwise it'll just be a case of every single person clicks request to join, and then we have to go through and approve everyone singly. So if you're interested, if somebody could collate a list, that'd be great. Otherwise, request to join.
Yeah, suppose, yeah. So yeah, if you email me if you're interested, and we'll get that sorted. Yeah.
Lovely, thanks a lot. And then we also do these things called surgeries. So if you've got an SBC query, a question, having problems with the tools, want to run through something, please feel free to give us a shout. We've got our email address down there. That's our team inbox. And we can then set up a Teams call, have half an hour, and run through your issues, run through the problems, and we can work out a solution. So we'd be more than happy to do those if anyone needs any help using our tools or going through SPC. And then this is just our training offer. Again, I know we plugged it a lot, but this is our training offer. And these are our, we've actually got 10 steps on here. We've got 8 steps of training, which are live at the moment. And then the bottom 2 are coming in May, I think it is. So lots and lots of training, open to anyone to sign up to, all on our futures site. Please feel free to sign up for that. And then finally, thank you very much. We've got a few Twitter details there. And on the final side, we've got a session evaluation, which Clifford has provided for us.
Thank you.
Yeah, while that's up, if you want to, does anyone have any questions for the guys?
Question in there, how do you get access to the SBC chart? So everything, all our tools, everything is on that future workspace.
And then you just download the Excel.
Yeah.
So Clifford, I wonder, we can either we can also perhaps just take the attendance list and invite everyone, and then if people don't want to join, then they can decline. Is that easier?
Perfect
for you? Yeah.
Sorry, mate, that's a good idea.
Yeah. So yeah, once you have to make a futures account, and then it accepts the request, and then you can download all of our tools and additional resources.
Yeah, so just to clarify then, next week you're going to send that invite out?
Yes, I will. We haven't. Yeah, we will work through it, because it may. I think it should work. I think we can just send it out, but I'm just thinking if people may need to have a futures account before. I'm not sure which way round, Adam.
I'm not, to be honest.
Confusing, because it's.
I'm sure it'll
easy.
work.
Yeah,
we'll work it out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. And I've been on the site, so yeah, it's really good.
Great.
Lots of great resources, well laid out. So, suppose, has anyone got any questions or comments? Is anyone here? I know. Is anyone here from the Southern team, where you seen Adam do that wee example with your data? Any thoughts?
Clifford, myself, and Grace O'Connor. I know Sandra Wickham had to go. It's amazing to see our data and how it could be presented. So thank you for that.
No problem. I thought it was really powerful data once it shows great improvement. So just getting it into the right format, it just can wow everyone then as well.
And
Thank you for sharing.
I think we knew once we had plotted it that way that it wasn't right, it wasn't powerful enough, and it didn't show the impact. what it was a starting point. And that's why we wanted to share it today, to see someone else's perspective on it and see what it looked like when it was presented in the run chart.
Definitely, and I don't think we picked up on this. We didn't really mention it. We don't really teach run charts. So the run chart being just the points plotted with a median through the middle of the data, because we think it's just as easy to put it into our SPC tool and get then the process limits around it. The only time we'd ever really use a run chart is if we had 6 or less points. So yeah, really useful I think, to put it into that SPC chart. So just wanted to mention that we don't tend to look at run charts, although I know a lot of QI people do, and it tends to be the first step of how you taught. So I was always taught run charts